Welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast, where we explore the kind of thinking we need to navigate a positive way forward. I'm your host, Morag, permaculture educator and global ambassador, filmmaker, eco-villager, food forester, mother, practivist, and all-round lover of thinking, communicating, and acting regeneratively. For a long time, it's been clear to me that to shift trajectory to a thriving one planet way of life, we first need to shift our thinking. The way we perceive ourselves in relation to nature, self, and community is the core. So this is true now more than ever, and even the way change is changing. Unprecedented changes are happening all around us at a rapid pace. So how do we make sense of this? To know which way to turn, to know what action to focus on, so our efforts are worthwhile and nourishing and are working towards resilience, regeneration, and reconnection. What better way to make sense than to join together with others in open, generative conversation? In this podcast, I'll share conversations with my friends and colleagues, people who inspire and challenge me in their ways of thinking, connecting, and acting. These wonderful people are thinkers, doers, activists, scholars, writers, leaders, farmers, educators, people whose work informs permaculture and spark the imagination of what a post-COVID, climate-resilient, socially just future could look like. Their ideas and projects help us to make sense in this changing world, to compost and digest the ideas, and to nurture the fertile ground for new ideas, connections, and actions. Together we'll open up conversations in the world of permaculture design, regenerative thinking, community action, earth repair, eco-literacy, and much more. I can't wait to share these conversations with you. Over the last 3 decades of personally making sense of the multiple crises we face, I always return to the practical and positive world of permaculture, with its ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share. I've seen firsthand how adaptable and responsive it can be in all contexts, from urban to rural, from refugee camps to suburbs. It helps people make sense of what's happening around them and to learn accessible design tools to shape their habitat positively and to contribute to cultural and ecological regeneration. This is why I've created the Permaculture Educators Program, to help thousands of people to become permaculture teachers everywhere through an interactive online dual certificate of permaculture design and teaching. We sponsor global perma-youth programs, women's self-help groups in the Global South, and teens in refugee camps. So anyway, this podcast is sponsored by the Permaculture Education Institute and our Permaculture Educators Program. If you'd like to find more about permaculture, I've created a 4-part permaculture video series to explain what permaculture is and also how you can make it your livelihood as well as your way of life. We'd love to invite you to join our wonderfully inspiring, friendly and supportive global learning community. So I welcome you to share each of these conversations, and I'd also like to suggest you create a local conversation circle to explore the ideas shared in each show and discuss together how this makes sense in your local community and environment. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I meet and speak with you today, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. It's my pleasure to welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World show today, author of a brand new permaculture book, The Good Life, How to Grow a Better World, which is released this week. So go out and get your copies. She's based in Nipaluna, Hobart, and is a permaculture landscaper, designer, educator and change maker. You may have seen her as guest presenter of ABC Gardening Australia or YouTubing with her goats. Her bright pink hair and her bright pink house reflect the vibrancy of passion and commitment she brings to all her work for a climate-safe future and a just transition. My guest today is Hannah Maloney. Enjoy. Welcome to the show, Hannah. It's so great to have you. Thank you for joining me today here. And thank you the other day too for joining the Perma Youth in conversation. They were so absolutely thrilled to have you there. I mean, you should have heard all the chatter after you left. They were so excited.
Oh, no, I'm so pleased to be here, and I was stoked to be on the Perma Youth conference as well. That was so wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm sitting here joining you from the land of the Gubbi Gubbi people nestled on the banks of the river that is known as the Mary River, but previously known as the Mukabulla River. Um, you're down in Tassie. What's the traditional name of Hobart?
Yeah, so Hobart's traditional name is Nipaluna, and we're on Muanina country, which is the broader region around Nipaluna, at the base of Kunani, which is also known as Mount Wellington. So, yeah, beautiful country down here. I look over the big ocean and river from where I am on top of a little hill. So,
amazing.
Yeah.
Where you're not originally from that area, though, are you?
No. So I'm from Meanjin in Brisbane. So I grew up in Kurilpa and West End. So I have really fond memories of my childhood, but also of southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, which is where I spent the first 18 years of my life. To this day, when I hear certain birds or if I'm visiting in that region, I can smell the humidity in the plants. It takes me straight back, like it's a home sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm originally from sort of the area around the Kulin Nation along the Mullen River, and it's a similar thing. There's a different, like that's in the sort of the outer edges of Melbourne, and there's a dryness and a certain scent of the oiliness of these apple gums, which have amazing round leaves. And there's something about that, like I've been here for most of my adult life, but yet there's still something about home. Yeah. And there's something I remember talking to an elder around here saying that really always acknowledge where, not just where you are, but where you're from. And that deep connection to country is so much part of who we are. And you feel it and you know it, don't you? It's in us. And I think it's a beautiful thing to acknowledge that it's for everybody. And we all have connection to place and that sense of place, and will mean different things to us, but it's definitely there. Yeah. Well, today is a special day for you. We may be hearing this a little bit after when we're recording this, but today is the day that your first book, it's the bookstores.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
What an amazing effort, and just the most apt book to have at this time. So what I haven't actually had a chance to look at it yet because it hasn't been to bookstores. So I'm hoping you can tell us a bit about it. But what I really did like when I was reading sort of the overview of it was that statement you're saying that by living an ordinary life, you can make an extraordinary difference. And that whole kind of notion that, living a good life is really about, doing climate action. And I think sometimes we can feel a little bit, I don't know, that it's all too big, it's all too overwhelming, and that, there's this concept of big picture activism, and that, what we do in our own homes doesn't really make a difference. And that's so disheartening when you hear those sorts of comments. But what you're talking about and where you are presenting is coming from a different place, a place of what I hear you talk about as like a radical hope. So can you just walk us through a bit about your book? Tell us about where it's come from and why you took the time in your amazingly busy life already to pen this and share it with the world.
Oh, of course. So the book is called The Good Life, How to Grow a Better World. And it's very much answering the question of how to live a good life in the face of the climate emergency, which is what we're living in now. And a lot of us have been thinking about this for decades. So I've personally been thinking about this for around 20 years and deeply worried about the climate science and the political trajectory that we're on, which is a huge lack of leadership. And amongst many explorations of how to be a good activist in my life, I kept coming up against this, just burnout, I guess. I'm running out of energy. I'm upset. I'm sad. I'm angry. It's like, how do we do this forever? And that's where I really pivoted and turned to permaculture, because it's quite a holistic design framework which can nourish yourself and nourish the broader world. And so that's what I've really latched on to keep me going as an activist in how to create a climate just and safe world. So that's my motivation. And the book very much does step people through how you can do that in a practical sense from a day-to-day on a small scale in your home or community scale. But it really sits in a broader framework of how actually we need to flex our muscles, our activist muscles, to put the pressure on politics, media and industry to do some drastically swift transition, make sure it's just transition as well towards a climate safe future. So yes, we should all compost, but it will not be enough if you don't vote for climate safe policies and demand, safe practices by big industry towards climate safety. So we have to embrace both that individual and collective, which really is the same thing. So we have to drop the ideas that, okay, I'm just going to look after myself and my own patch, my own garden, my own farm. And we have to also drop the other side of the stories, which is don't bother doing anything at home. We've just got to be locking on into the forest or the machines, which is fantastic. We actually need to do both of those things and more.
Yeah. So what is that? What is that more? Because if we're thinking about, so we've got to this point with permaculture and we've got our house in order.
Yeah.
What is that? What is that more? What are those things that you're advocating
Wonderful
that
question.
we flex our muscles and do more of?
Yes, I think it will be different for everybody. And there's a couple of things to acknowledge where the more privilege you have, the more capacity you have to do more things. There's a lot of people in the world who don't have that privilege to work towards climate safety, and they're just trying to keep a roof over their heads and, food on the table. Fantastic. They need to keep focusing on that. And people like myself and others who have more capacity, more privilege, can carry those people through to a climate safe future. So when I think about doing more, I think about how can I help create a good life for everybody, not just myself. We personally have a very good life. It's very abundant. It's very beautiful. We have housing security. We have meaningful livelihoods. We are so privileged. How can I flex my muscles to carry more people with me beyond my own personal family and friendship circles? So that's what I think about, and that's why I think about politics a lot. I think about community structures that can help build resilience locally and beyond. If we've got that capacity, why wouldn't we have a crack at doing more? Yeah.
So when you talk about politics, what does that mean to you? Because, there's some things about, like I just earlier today was in Maloney, the local town, and there was a protest outside the local politician's office. That's politics. Getting involved down at your local community garden and transforming what's happening on the commons is also politics. So for you, where do you imagine that political activism taking place?
Both of those things. I think I am very focused. Like in Australia, we have a federal election coming up within the year, so I am very focused on advocating for climate safe policies. So that's a short term focus for me, because that's an opportunity that's presenting itself. But beyond that, politics is everything. What you eat is political. How you transport yourself is political. How you invest your money is political. I think people sometimes go, "Hannah, you've got to keep the politics out of permaculture." I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you said that, because it's exactly right, isn't it? We sometimes have this separate thing, but politics is all about the choices and decisions that we make and how we organise ourselves and how we're in relation to one another and the land and our food system, and it's all of that.
And I think there's a cultural disconnect in Australia. I think this is a bit of a blanket statement, but I think there is a disconnect going, I don't do politics, it's over there. It's not for me, it's for a certain type of person. I'm not that type of person. When I really think there's a huge opportunity to reclaim our democracy, reclaim that politics, go, actually, we want our country to look like this, and we want these people to represent us, and to remember that they are working for us. We don't have to just follow what they say. They go, no, we can explain to them clearly and intelligently and compassionately, this is how we want our world to be, and lovingly demand that. We don't have to just sit and take what's happening right now. It is completely irresponsible use of power which is happening, and it makes me furious. So when I think about politics, I think about voting responsibly, but also supporting people to run for politics locally and nationally if need be. But we're seeing a really interesting movement of independent voices starting to stand up, which are can break free of, really strong party lines which can hold people back. And I think how can we support more independent voices to, get voted, get elected, which can actually really speak for the people. Yeah.
Have you ever thought of standing?
Well, it's a good question. So one of my friends, Millie Rooney, who works with Australia Remade, she actually asks me this regularly, and she makes a point. She asks, but not just me, but she asks everybody in the space. She's like, have you considered standing for politics? Not necessarily to put pressure on people to do that, but to make people start thinking it's an option, and that because really, if you look at Australian politics, it's very white and it's very male, and that's how it's been for quite a long time. And Millie Rooney talks about how we have to practice remembering that we can be there too, and to potentially take that opportunity if it does present itself, and to be brave enough to have a go. Currently, I'm not convinced I'd be the most useful person in that scenario. My skills, I think, are better used elsewhere. However, never say never, because why wouldn't we try if it could potentially make the world a better place? Yeah.
So in the kind of community activism space that you're occupying now, as well as the work that you're doing as an educator and now as an author, and also the films you put out and what you're doing on TV, what's happening in your local community? Where do you feel like you can step up and speak up in that space?
Oh, it's a really good question. I think in Nipaluna in Hobart, around climate emergency, there's some really pressing issues in our valley, if you like. So we're one of the most fire-prone cities in Australia, at the base of Kwinani. The last big bushfire here was in 1967, and it burnt huge tracts of land, like enormous tracts of land, and it's very, very primed to happen again. So every summer we're seeing dry lightning strikes, it's a really scary time. So summer has a layer of stress and anxiety over us.
Because you're in a hill and you're in a timber house, aren't you?
Oh, yeah. So we're very, very vulnerable here, as is most of Hobart. And so that's 250,000 people in the greater Hobart region. And so when I think about climate action here, it's quite a practical thing that comes to my mind. I go, and there's a lot of community groups working on, and our local council, I should really acknowledge, do great leadership around bushfire safety, cool burnings, cultural burnings with First Nation groups, but still it's not enough. It's underfunded. It's hugely problematic. And so, look, I'm not a leader in that space at all, but I'm an advocate and supporter. So that's a really very practical thing that needs to be addressed in the immediate future. So I think that's sort of one burning risk or threat, if you like, to our Nipaluna city. But then I think my ongoing conversation I do with our community is how to build resilience, which is very proactive. So we do what's become an annual edible garden tour around Nipaluna, just to show people what's possible in small or awkward city spaces. So everything from really steep to really small to really shady to really sunny, everything in between, just to highlight that you can use some of the use some of the land you have to grow some of the food you need.
So just tell us a little bit more about that, because I think that's a fantastic movement that seems to be starting to pop up in different places. So how do you organise that? Is that a group of you, or how does that work?
Sure, and I should acknowledge I copied this from the Darebin Council in Victoria, and I went, oh, that looks cool. So because I've been working in what I do for quite a few years, it's easy for me to know straight away I can ask 20 gardens in my municipality that could open their gates for the day. And it's similar to the open house schemes, like open garden scheme. And I've been fortunate enough to get some grants from the local council to fund my time and another person's time to help organise a day, which is pretty straightforward. We use our existing website for booking systems. And, once we have to cap numbers, especially with COVID in mind. But, once people have got all the the bookings made. We give them their addresses and their instructions for the day, and it's a self-guided tour. So it's quite
great.
It means there's not a lot of infrastructure, a lot of staff required. They go, look, here's the address, here's your host's name, and here's your time slot that you're allowed to go visit this beautiful garden. So it means
that's really simple, isn't it?
Yeah, it's super simple, because I think often we get overcomplicated in our brains, like, I've got to do this big thing, and we have thousands of people go through, but I don't. I just hang out in my garden all day. I'm not running around the town.
No, and you're just talking to people as they come through and explaining things. And so, and what kind of feedback are you getting from people who participate in that?
Oh, sure, it's hugely positive. It's what I look at. It's probably one of the most successful things I've done in terms of community engagement and positive outcomes. In permaculture, we talk about having systems with minimal input and maximum output, and that can be applied to a garden or a community project.
Yep.
This is one of the projects which has minimal input from me and maximum output, which has many, many ripples through our community and beyond. So I still get sent pictures of people's new gardens or developing gardens, or just, positive feedback of going, I feel more hopeful now. I feel less anxious about our future because I understand what's possible in a city context. And that's equally as valuable, if not more valuable.
And, I think too, there's something about knowing what's possible, but also knowing that there's a whole lot of other people are doing it too. And sometimes I think there's a sense of, feeling alone in the sort of the worry about it. But when you know that there's this ripple of people doing it all throughout the city, I think maybe that can also help sometimes as well.
Yeah. And I think a lot of these practical things we talk about for community resilience, which is food production, building community relationships and catching water, all those practical things, they're actually really quick to set up. And we saw that a little bit with the beginning of COVID, that things happen really quickly when you want them to, or when you need them to. And we used to help run the Hobart City Farm down here, which is now closed. But someone asked me the day, he's like, why are you running a city farm again, Hannah? We need it now. And I just said to them, we could set one of those up within a month. We would have it growing vegetables, and within 3 months you'd be harvesting from it. And I've gone to a space where those things can happen when people will really get behind and support them, rather than only doing them when some people are loving it and not getting the support you need to make it flourish.
Yeah.
So I've got a lot of tools in the back of my brain. Like, these things will happen when the need is there, and then they're going to pump in the best way.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting categorization of how do I spend my energy now to get.
It's kind of like triaging, isn't it? It's kind of like you look at, well, I've got this much energy. Yeah. And this is where the most value is, like you were saying before, that principle of like, what can you put in to get the most impact? And I think it's a really important thing to constantly ask ourselves, when we are focusing on this kind of work, is to think, have that reflective time. Think, is what I'm doing the most effective use of my time? And that bigger picture of, creating a climate safe future is kind of the goal. We can become very busy.
Oh, yeah.
It's so easy to busy ourselves with a whole lot of stuff. We were talking about this just before we pressed record, and, there's so many great things to say yes to all the time. But where, and how you decide that is really challenging sometimes. But I think it's important to stay in that reflective space, and also to know, like you just said then, that you can, you've done it, you've seen that it can work, and it's really, it needs that sort of momentum to make it happen. I wonder what else about, like, you also work in the transport and energy space. Tell us a bit about that.
I think you're referring to the Good Car Company, is that right?
I think I am, yes.
Just checking. So technically I'm not involved in this. This is a business that my partner and two dear friends run, and they import secondhand electric cars from Japan at reduced price, and they run what they call community bulk buys across Australia, so people can access them more affordably, and also not have to do the insane amount of paperwork and processing involved in bringing a car in from a different country. So I'm very much on the periphery of that, but we're all very interconnected. So they started that business around 2 years ago, I think. And it was directly after the last federal election, actually, where we were really disheartened that Liberal government got back in with no climate safe policies at all, and the complete opposite, actually. So that was very much the motivation. Is like, what else can we do? So we've got my own business, Good Life Permaculture, which we really value that work. And Anton and two other friends went, what about transport in Australia? Australia, it's hugely problematic with the amount of emissions it produces. And helping that transport industry to transition to electric vehicles is one small thing. It's not the solution at all, but it is part of a bigger picture of what could be happening. And if you look around the world, they're leaps and bounds ahead in electric vehicles, normalising them, I guess, and making them affordable. Australia is woefully behind. So the good car company are just having a crack, and that's the beauty of this, of what people like myself and you and my partner Anton are doing. We are ordinary people trying to make extraordinary things happen, and some of them are working, and how wonderful. And a lot of things that we've tried haven't worked. But
like you say, you give it a crack, and and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily even a failure, that there's so many other things that you either learnt from that or that have sprung out of that as it's kind of a compost, something else to happen,
Yeah, and there is in our culture, failing is not a good thing. And it's like we struggle with that because we've had many failures in our life, and it's you have to work really hard to remind yourself this is not a bad thing. We've learned so much through this process, and now look what this new pathway presents itself, which you couldn't have possibly imagined previously. So, and I think that's, we have that level of privilege where we can take some risk, and being in a partnership, Anton and I can hold each other a little bit. When I started my business quite a few years ago now, I just quit my job. I went, Anton, can you cover the rent for the next 6 months, please? And similarly, when he started his business, I'm like, we now have a mortgage. We bought a property with the bank. I'll carry the mortgage for the next 2 years while you do this, and so we tag team. And I think that's really important to acknowledge that privilege of having a partner. We can support each other to take more risks. Yeah. So it's not for everybody, but it is for a lot of us. Yeah.
Yeah. And taking the risk. And, I think, I don't know about for you, but I can't not take the risk.
Yeah. Sometimes I actually go, gee, it'd be nice to have a rest or just be a bit more comfortable emotionally. But then I might have a week off or something. I'm like, okay, I'm ready now.
And like while the holiday's on, I go away, I might unplug, but I get a book and it's full of ideas and plans and projects by the time I come back. And
so cool.
My mind just doesn't stop about it.
Yeah.
And I think it's because it's not that I don't, I do enjoy going out for a break or going sailing or walking or hiking or camping or whatever it might be, but my mind is completely always, thinking about what's happening in the world and how is it that we can, make a contribution to that. And
I think someone once said to me, so, a life of activism, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because you're constantly trying to push outside your comfort zone, stretching yourself and flexing those activist muscles as much as you can, and constantly trying to do more within your capacity. And it's still hard for me to be comfortable with that all the time. Like I'm naturally more of an introvert, and I push myself to do more and more public things because I can see it could be useful, but it's not a natural skill. But remember hearing Bob Brown speak many years ago, how he was naturally, these are my own words, but he was implying how he was also quite an introvert as a young person, and he just practiced so he could hold that public space so beautifully and courageously as he did for many decades and still does today. So people like that are a real inspiration to me. I'm like, oh, you can just practice this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, and I I sort of see the same sort of pattern in what I'm doing. Like, I remember there was a point when I was about, I don't know, 18 or 19, I wouldn't get up and speak in public. No, absolutely no way. I would just not. And it took a long time of just trying. And I think what happened was that the flame inside me was so strong about wanting to speak about certain things that it was that spoke. It wasn't me. It wasn't me speaking in front of a group. It was that bigger picture. And I think somehow, you know, when you are speaking from the heart, or from, you know, that you're part of this movement towards change in a certain way, it just kind of, I don't know even where the words come from sometimes. They're just kind of there, and how they come.
That's wonderful. I think it's important to foster that level of trust, which I'm definitely still trying to work on. It's like trust that you belong here, your voice is valuable, and it's important to be heard, and B, trust your intelligence and experience, that your words are meaningful. Yeah, and so it's an interesting thing to keep practicing and keep trusting that feeling. Yeah.
And it's a little bit too, like, I think, you know, permaculture itself is a practice as well. It's not like okay, you can come and do one of our courses or something and all right, you're done. You know, like, that's the opening of the door. And then, you know, it's like what we're talking about with David and last night with his new movie about reading landscape, that's a practice as well, you know, that you don't just come with all that knowledge and skill about how to read landscape. It's about taking the time to notice and practice and be in the landscape, be in community, be in communication, you know, design, speak, you know, like, it's just putting yourself out there and finding those opportunities. You know, I think I was saying before, I don't say no very often because I just keep saying yes to different ways I think that it might be able to bring something to the table.
Yeah, beautiful.
So going back to the energy thing, I was kind of got a bit distracted there. What I was asking you about was, you know, the bigger part of that question was around transition. And if we're to transition away from oil and gas, like, where is it that you're speaking, maybe through your book or through the work that you're doing in your community, you know, able to sort of offer some insights for people about how does that even happen, particularly when you're living in a city?
Oh, sure. So I think that again, there'll be many different answers depending on people's needs. And so cars are an incredibly useful tool, especially for people who, I've got some friends with chronic fatigue and they rely on cars to get from their home to the corner shop. What a wonderful tool to support them in their lifestyle, in their meaningful life. And so I think cars are not evil is what I'm trying to say. I think we could use them more smartly. And in cities, we have an incredible opportunity to share more resources. So there's a number of enterprises that are set up across Australia now that you can do car shares. So you don't have to actually own a car, but you can book a car use in on the online calendar. And in Tassie, we actually sold our car in 2019 and entered an informal car share agreement with some friends around the corner. And because there's no formal car share enterprise in Tassie at the time. So we just set up our own online calendar and it's been going for, over 2 years and it's really great.
Fantastic.
It means that we sold our car and I bought a second electric bike and we made them really big, long bikes so we can put our daughter on the back of them. And that's not for everybody, but it works really well for us. So we're really happy within that. And we also, if we need to do, if our car share friends need their car, we'll just hire a car. There's so many cars just hanging out in the city. And so I think it's not a perfect solution, but it is a very quick and instant solution for a lot of us. And when we talk about transition, we can't go from where we are now to this utopian fantasy of everything's perfect. Like that's probably never going to happen. So let go of that, but hold on to elements of it. But I think it's like, what are some really practical, realistic pathways and steps we can start doing now? And there's some of them I just outlined have been really straightforward. You just have to be a bit more organised and think a bit more creatively sometimes. Another big obvious one in cities is that public transport infrastructure could be so much more, especially in Lutruwita in Tasmania. We don't have fantastic public transport. So most of our towns and cities are designed around using cars and not trains, buses, all those other options available to some of us. And so I think that's a missed opportunity. So I do get a bit disheartened when I see another new highway going in. I'm like, why don't you just invest a tenth of that in good bus systems? Like, there's a lot of short-term thinking going on with infrastructure development, and that's a shame. Yeah.
Yeah. And is there a really big movement? Well, it feels it from an outsider's perspective, but for the relocalisation of the food system in Tassie, what is that seen really intact there in terms of being able to access what you need?
It's an interesting question. I think Lutruwita, Tasmania, has always had a really amazing food scene or culture, is a better word. We are blessed here because we're an island. We have a level of I don't think protection is the right word, but we've got this nice level of sovereignty or something. Like we really look after our own, if you like. I don't know. But we have incredible, diverse farms and food systems, so we eat so well here. And I forget that because when I have travelled in the past on the mainland of Australia, I come back like, oh, we're so lucky. Just the quality of the fresh produce, even if it isn't organic, it's still significantly tastier and more fresh. Which is really interesting. So I think food down here is really important. It's part of our culture. And people, I know when tourists come, they're like, we're just here to eat. This kind of sort of eating tour. And definitely I'd say in the past 10 years, I've been in and out of Tassie for around 19 years. And in the past 10, I think food tourism has really just boomed, so that's led to a lot more opportunity maybe for more producers to really craft what they're doing. And so there's been more celebration of local food production and, local food eating as well amongst that. There's also a really wonderful, movement of young farmers and small farmers and family farmers around Tasmania. I'd say we could always have more because we need more local food diversity and resilience everywhere, really, including Lutruwita, Tasmania. Yeah,
I think it's a really exciting movement, isn't it? The young farmers movement. That I find that so encouraging because they're coming into it and often doing it differently.
Mm.
Yeah,
and really, especially when you think about land ownership, so it's more and more just not possible for a lot of people of all ages, but especially younger people. And it's like, okay, how can we farm without owning land or owning, tens of thousands and sometimes more dollars worth of equipment, So that's been like there's more land sharing happening. There's more, leasing of land and different kinds of arrangements, which, again, you can look overseas and you'll find lots of really established precedents, but here it's still a bit strange, a bit new.
Have you got any community land trusts going on down there at all yet?
Oh.
It's something that's starting to...
Yeah.
I hear lots of talk about, I know, again, overseas as well, it's so well established. And this idea of actually creating community land trusts, not just for, community farms, but also for... community type housing, affordable housing. I wonder too whether that housing affordability is starting to affect younger. Younger communities.
It was crazy 10 years ago. It's even crazier now, And I think someone just told me yesterday a house around the corner from us sold for $1.9 million, and it's not even that great, that house, And this is little Nipaluna and Hobart. We've got a really poor economy in our island, and I bet you $10 it wasn't a local who bought that house. It's someone from Melbourne or Sydney.
Yeah, we're having the same issue here in up around Maloney and, here in the Eco Village. There's not so much here in the Eco Village, but around the hills that, people people who've been living here for decades and can't live here anymore. They're having to move away.
It's a really sad thing when people have to leave their community that they've grown up with sometimes or lived with for a long time. And what does that mean for our culture? And so and when people are being displaced from where they've grown up. So it's a big chat. And of course there's homelessness amongst that as well, so we have a high housing crisis where people can't even get access to secure housing, let alone a long-term or quality housing. So I talk about it in the book I wrote, because sometimes people think they forget that things like the housing industry is actually part of the problem and solution towards countering the climate emergency. And so these things will be found in every sector. There's huge problems, but there's huge opportunity as well towards thinking more creatively and living differently.
Yeah, I wonder, like in an urban area like yours, what are some of the solutions that we could, like opening up spare rooms, creating space for cabins? Like what are the sorts of things that you're suggesting?
Yeah, like there's definitely, and we've seen it everywhere, like the tiny house movement, like where you don't actually have to own land, but you might park a moving house on somebody's property. So there's those kinds of really quick fixes, if you like. There's other interesting ones. That is a project called Home for Homes, which the Big Issue set up. So it's a national program, and it's where people can put I think it's 0.01% of the amount that they sell their property. They give that tiny percentage to Home for Homes, and they invest that into buying homes for the homeless people, and it's quality housing. So it's been working really well, and it's a really simple, again, minimal input, maximum output program where you can harness a tiny bit of surplus cash and redirect that to creating a different way of housing, and potentially could eliminate homelessness if people joined in. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I hadn't heard about that before.
I know.
I know there's something else that I'd heard you speak about before it's a whole completely different issue, but it's around rent, and it's about paying the rent. And that's something that I've heard you speak a lot. Do you want to just chat a bit about that maybe?
Sure. So it's about how do we acknowledge and centre First Nations people and communities in acknowledging that we're living on their unceded land across all parts of Australia. And I talk about this a lot in my work, making sure that there's really good acknowledgement there, especially in permaculture. It's important. We stand on the very broad shoulders of First Nations cultures across the world. Paying the rent is one really tangible way we can, put your money where your mouth is. So I do a monthly donation to the local Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre down the road from us. And that's just an ongoing, no obligation donation going, look, I acknowledge I live here on your unceded land. Here's some money that you can determine what you do with it, do what you will with it. And they run fantastic programs in a range of different areas for the Tasmanian Aboriginal community. It's a way of just giving back some self-determination when so much has been taken away from them. So much. It's just devastating to really think and feel into that. So we try to do things in every angle. That's like one of the easier things I can do. I'm like, why wouldn't I do that? And some of the harder, more complex things I do is that ongoing self-education about racism, colonisation, white supremacy, what that means, what's that meant for the past 200 years, what that means now, and how I, not willingly, but help perpetuate that in the society that we live in, and how can I help unravel that? And so self-education is it's an uncomfortable thing, because you have to go, oh, shit. Fuck. Oh, sorry, I swore. It's not an easy, pleasurable walk in the park. How
do you educate yourself on that?
Yeah, I guess it's a lot of reading, a lot of listening. So many podcasts now. So people go, oh, where should I look? I'm like, I feel like I see it in every direction I look. Like so many books and podcasts and radio interviews and essays are out everywhere. Like I don't feel like that's an excuse. I think
it's just opening up your mindscape to see it. Yeah,
it's everywhere. And a lot of First Nations voices in Australia and across the world are incredibly generous with providing really coherent resources for white people, which is so kind of them, and really breaking it down very simply. So I just read, there's nothing in particular I would point people to, but like there's so much to explore, and just to acknowledge, you know, the three permaculture ethics that we work from are earth care, people care and fair share. And I really come back to that people care ethic. If we're real, if we're really wanting to be authentic people working towards good change, let's start centering the people who are suffering the most. And First Nation communities are very much part of that pool of people. We lose nothing and we gain everything when we do this. Like sometimes people are like, oh, it's too hard, it's too confronting, I don't like this. It's like, this is a good, positive thing. Positive things aren't always easy, but they are always better. Yeah.
And I guess too, it's another group of people that is really needing some support are the refugee communities and asylum seekers. And I wonder whether there's any work with the permaculture community and those communities where you are.
Yeah, so absolutely acknowledging that, Morag. And obviously we're seeing huge atrocity in Afghanistan at the moment. It's very much in the spotlight. We could go to, unfortunately, a huge amount of countries and see similarly atrocities. And so we're in Tasmania. We don't have a huge influx of refugees in recent years. We did, but it very much slowed down with political decisions. And so that was very sad to see. There's amazing different organisations like the Migrant Resource Centre and associated groups who do fantastic ongoing programs of people to welcome them here and also help integrate them into the broader community in different ways, which is wonderful. And when we had in Lutruwita some years ago, we had quite a lot of people coming from different African countries and parts of the Middle East, and we partnered with what's called the Phoenix Centre, and which is a branch of the Migrant Resource Centre, I believe. And we would work with newly arrived refugees to build food gardens in their rental properties. Like, no one owned a house, but we just build these great gardens with them, make lots of food and play heaps of soccer and listen to lots of hip hop. And again, it's a really simple thing. People go, oh, Hannah, why would you even bother? Like, it's only like a 6-month project. I'm like, it's cool. Like, why wouldn't you have a crack? So we're making new friends here, and these people, we don't even know the trauma they've been through. We can only imagine, and I can guarantee it'd be devastating. And the very least we can do is welcome them to our community in this way, you know. So I tell that story just to highlight it doesn't have to be a big thing. It doesn't have to be a huge commitment necessarily, but every bit helps. I really believe that. And you know, you never know what's going to stay in somebody's hearts and mind as a positive impact for their life. And yeah.
And, you know, having someone who just opens their arms and their hearts and their big broad smile and have a game and a laugh and, you know, have a dance even, you know, like that, as well as the food gardens and just the welcome. That it's so amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So these little things can have big impacts.
Yeah, totally. Wow. So I just want to sort of, if we can bring our conversation back into your book, because I just think this is something that I would love everyone to grab a hold of and have a look. But I'm also totally fascinated by how you even make time to write a book. And this is a very selfish question. What is your writing process? Like, I just don't seem to even find a moment to even write my blog posts at the moment, let alone a book.
Yeah.
How do you do it?
Well, it's a funny thing. So I was approached by a firm press, who are the publishing company, to write the book. And I initially said, oh, thank you so much, but no thanks. I'm so busy. There's enough books in the world. You know, thanks. See you later. And they you know, gently just persisted, and which I'm really grateful for. And they said, look, there's a good opportunity to add another voice to this conversation, a really positive voice. We need more of that solution-based thinking in this time. I'm like, okay, yep, you're right. And so I said yes. And then then they said, can you do it in 4 months? And I went, oh. I maybe. They went, oh, you know, you can recycle a lot of your writing that I've done over the years on my blog. You can cut and paste some things. And I went, oh, yeah, that doesn't sound too hard. And then it ended up being, I wrote the whole book from scratch, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I've tried doing that too, like recycling a post. I just think it was written at that time with that thinking and those examples, and I've grown since then, and there's something new I want to add in, and I can understand that.
Yeah, I definitely overcommitted. I don't know what it is, but in me, if I commit to a deadline, 99.99% of the time, I'll just stick to it, and it's in me. I just can't not try. And so this book was written around a very busy time in my life, but I took myself away, I think, for 2 weekends, and that was at the beginning of the book and towards the end of the writing process, just to try to have deep thinking time. And then in between, it was a lot of 4 a.m. starts and occasionally 3 a.m. starts. And I'd have 2 to 3 hours some mornings, and then occasionally a day here or there. But I did find it really hard in the daytimes to focus on that because in our life it's quite busy. I work from home, but, I have to talk to a client, or my daughter will come running through, and, the goats need to be fed. And so it's lots of distractions. But I remember hearing Lee Sales talk about writing one of her books. Who's an ABC Australian journalist, and she wrote her book, I think over 2 years. I can't quite remember, but she said every 5-minute break that she had, that's where she would write it. I was like, whoa.
Wow.
Like in between
amazing.
Interviews or whatever project she was
Gosh.
doing. And she said there was no other way, but it did take 2 years of that. And I'm sure, hopefully, she had some longer little spurts in there as well.
Because I just can't, I'm still, when I'm, in 5 minutes, I'm still just kind of catching my thoughts,
I know. And I do. I have some envy for some people's brains seem to work a lot quicker than others, and they just they're sharp. They can just make it all fly together. I'm what they call a reflective thinker.
Yes. I often take myself off for a walk down along the river, and if I'm stuck for ideas, and I'll go for a walk along there, and it'll all become absolutely clear.
Yeah.
And then sometimes by the time I get home, I've remembered. Other times it's just gone, and I think, oh no, I had it all worked out. Or I'm lying in bed, just in that sort of moment when you're waking up, and I think, okay, I'll just set my mind to think about this particular, challenge that I have at the moment, and like a writing challenge or a project or something, and I'll work it all out. And then I'll nod off and I'll wake up again. I was like, oh no, it's gone. But I think it's there somewhere. And then I just need to sort of. So I think sometimes when I stop trying, it kind of happens. But I think like you're saying, just having a daily practice of a few hours.
Having that pattern does definitely helps. But I think also I'm very good at I guess you could say pushing myself, but I can go, oh, Hannah, there's an opportunity here. If do you want to take it, or do you want to let this one slide? And a lot of them I go, oh no, this is a good one. I've got to really try, and I just make it work. And for short bursts of time, which could be a few months here or there, I can make that work. I couldn't sustain that my whole life, but I can go, okay, this 4 months is going to be big 4 months. Let's do it, and then I just kind of go. And then I've actively this year, I actually cut down my workload a lot this year because I needed to get some balance back into my life. So now I have weekends every weekend. I won't work at 4 a.m. this year. I often start at 6 a.m. But I won't. It's not a compulsory thing. Yeah, which is good.
Good on you. Wow, yeah. I need to take a leaf out of your book. Yeah. I'm often still up at 1 a.m. I'm the other end. I'm the night owl.
I'm an early bird. Yep.
It was because when my kids were little, well, they still are kind of little. I have a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And it was when they went to sleep. Because I homeschool, and they're around. My office is at home, but it was when they went to sleep was when the house was quiet, and it was just kind of like a breath out. And then all of a sudden it was this moments of clarity. And so I just trained myself to make my work time in those spaces in between life, and that's kind of, guess, how I ended up there. I keep thinking, it'd be nice to sort of get up really early and do the other end.
Yeah.
I did it a few times. Someone said, you must get up early. It's the best thing for your body. I felt jet lagged for weeks.
Oh, no.
So out of whack. So anyway,
yeah. No,
but I do think,
do what works for you. Yeah.
I think, giving yourself a weekend, I think that's something that's probably a really good step to take.
Yeah.
So what's coming next for you? What's your next big burst of projects you've got coming along?
Well, I do have a thing. I'm not sure I'm allowed to tell you what it is. I don't know.
Oh, well, if you can't tell me, no, that's all right.
I know I can. But I've got lots of ongoing rolling projects. So I do have quite a large landscape design workload. So I'm always working with a range of clients on developing their beautiful landscapes to be regenerative and beautiful. And then we have a great calendar of workshops that we have a source of teachers that come and go on as well. But I do have a couple of other projects there in the background that I'm just just developing. I don't think I can tell you about them yet. Sorry.
Oh no, that's all right. That's fine. Well, good luck with those.
Yeah, but I guess the big one for me, right, is in front of my face. This week I launched my book. In Luna. We've got down here. We haven't got COVID restrictions, which touch wood. So we've managed to having 300 people in the local town hall, which feels really special. Like it feels nice that we can gather, because it is special. So that's for the next month. I think I'll be really doing a lot of community chats for my book and online as well, and focusing on that, kind of just having those climate conversations.
Yeah, that's huge. Have you got is your publishers organised for you to do a whole lot of talks? Radio around the country, Zooms and all sorts of things, so you can't travel? That's right. So doing a lot of online things. And then in Tassie, I'm going to do a mini Tassie tour up in the northwest regions, which I'll launch shortly. So that we'll do, lots of online things and some local things as well. So fantastic. That's my immediate focus. And then, I'll do some other things as well on top of my other workload, which are all centred around how to build skills and resilience towards climate safety and justice. And so that's, as much as possible, I try to centre that in my work. It's all that's why I do my work, but it's not always at the forefront of the conversation. I'm like, how can we make that at the front of every conversation? It's what I'm really interested in. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. Well, good luck with your coming tour and the release of your book. It's a wonderful contribution into the world of permaculture, but broader than permaculture, into the world of, how we can actually move forward in a really positive and hopeful way. So thank you for taking that time and dedicating yourself at your 3 a.m.s to bring that to life. And thanks for having a chat with me. Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Gorgeous. Thanks, Anna. Thank you. So that's all for today. Thanks so much for joining me. If you'd like a copy of my top 10 books to read, click the link below, pop in your email, and I'll send it straight to you. You can also watch this interview over on my YouTube channel. I'll put the link below as well. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and if you've enjoyed it, please consider giving me a star rating. Believe it or not, the more people do this, the more podcast bots will discover this little podcast. So thanks again, and I'll see you again next week.